Hello and welcome to Pro Tour Season 2 coverage for the MSEM format. Today we're going to be watching the losers finals match between Cyber, who is on red-black Villainy, and JustNobody, who is on Mardu Adiran Survivor combo. So this is a rematch. In winner's bracket, JustNobody lost to Cyber 2-1. And so Cyber should technically be favored in this matchup, as we've seen before. However, keeping at 5 isn't super great for Cyber. And with JN gets to be on the play because they were first seed, so they had a higher seed than Cyber, and that lets them determine play versus draw. Adiran is a deck that does very well on the play, with a potential turn 2. No one has done it yet, but it is still on the table. As well as very consistent turn 3s with the tutoring with Egg of Avarice. For those of you who don't know, how the Adiran Survivor combo works is it involves a sack outlet and 2 copies of the card Adiran Survivor. Adiran Survivor is a 2-1 for 1 that enters the battlefield tapped, but whenever you sacrifice a permanent, if Adiran Survivor is in your graveyard, you can pay 1 life. If you do, you return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you basically can infinitely loop 2 of them with a sack outlet. And if you have a Blood Artist effect that immediately kills your opponent on the spot, there are other cards like Devouring Flame where you can go Devouring Flame turn 1 to Adiran Survivor's turn 2 and then just kill your opponent at turn 2 if they don't have any interaction. This is made easier by a card called Egg of Avarice, which is an artifact for 2 colorless, which taps for sacrifice a creature, you can tutor 1-drop from your deck. So that makes finding the combo pieces much easier. Right now what we're seeing though is JN is leading with another powerful 1-drop, Unmasker of Fate's Design. It's a 2-1 for 1, which when it enters the battlefield, you look at target player's hand. When you do, you can take a card from their hand and essentially exile it until they can pay 2 and 1 life. So exiling Stolen Secrets here is really good for JN, because otherwise Cyber would probably have played that, naming, I suppose, Artifact trying to grab Egg. And JN has a Adiran Survivor here. And I don't believe Cyber had anything else relevant other than Performer. Performer of Desire isn't even good in this matchup because it's a win con, but versus a Adiran Survivor, your deck's win cons are going to be way slower. So you really want, it was just 3 lands and Performer. So you really want to have interaction of some sort. And Villainy is usually a deck that's really good at interacting, but it looks like Cyber had bad luck on their first 2 hands and just had to keep at 5. And otherwise, they were more at risk of losing to themselves. Drawing Zetla is good, but and -2 is better than -1 here, since JN does have stuff that he wants to bin, given his deck functions a lot from the graveyard. Discarding Chigao is a good random hit. Cyber is still just going to take a pounding to the life total. Will be going down to 14 on this next turn. And even though JN missed a land drop last turn, it kind of doesn't matter because JN's deck is mostly 1-drops. So, and as long as Cyber is missing interaction, the longer Cyber is missing interaction, the smoother of a ride this is for JN. Especially with a 5-card grip versus Cyber's 3, 2 of which we know are lands and 1 of which is Performer, which Performer comes down next turn and is a fine blocker, but it's not going to be winning this game for Cyber, unless Cyber just actually Cyber could go land, Performer, next turn, or the turn after that, drop a land, discard whatever card they have, and flip Performer, and then try to have a faster clock than JN. But I don't think that would work. Okay, JN now has access to his second land, tapping 2 for Young Necromancer, and this makes JN's board a lot more wipe or removal resistant, essentially. And JN is just playing like the fair aggressive aggro plan, or like grindy aggro plan. So Adiran combo was kind of an evolution of an existing deck that JN made a while back called Anarchist Thanksgiving, which was basically like a red-black super. It was an aggressive deck which ran a lot of like recursive one drops, and its aim was to win through like raw value and be able to like potentially outgrind control decks which are just trying to one for one it, and then have enough of like a reasonable aggro plan to deal with faster matchups. So we're saying that back, even though JN hasn't hit the combo, having like this backup plan is fairly reasonable. Also, I'm finding it very interesting that Cyber is not playing Performer here, but is instead playing Stolen Secrets. So probably going to grab Autumnal Watch, though I'm not certain. Blood Artist is pretty damn, like, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation here. Both of these, neither of these options are very attractive to let JN keep. Actually, Autumnal Watch may be the less galling of the two, because at least here, does Cyber have any wipes main? If Cyber does have a wipe main, might have a way to get out of this, but then Blood Artist makes that harder. Let's see. No, actually doesn't look like Cyber has any wipes. I guess Cyber's stabilization plan is just have life gain with Lucienne and Villainy, and then just a bunch of removal. So Cyber is trying to decide whether to, and ends up grabbing Autumnal Watch in the end. Fair. Because if JN Luxax into a second Adiran Survivor, then having the sack outlet, or having the having the sack outlet can just let JN draw into another Blood Artist effect anyways. So JN is swinging out with everything. I'm probably dropping Zetla this turn. I don't think Blood Artist is very favorable here. Okay, I guess JN decided Blood Artist was more favorable there. Okay, and we know, so Cyber has 3 cards in hand, and Lucien's actually really strong here. So going to exile, which one? So exile to Adiran Survivor, and it's going to gain 2, or gain 1, sorry, because Adiran Survivor CMC is 1, which is a slight bit of stabilization here. And since JN has to like now direct a creature to attack Lucien, it makes this clock on Cyber much slower. So we know JN has a Zetla in hand, so it does have a play. Could Zetla and then try to random discard, hoping to hit the Performer of Desire? Okay, yeah, and JN making the right play, killing Lucien and dealing 2 to Cyber. Okay, second main tapping out for a second Young Necromancer. Okay. So yeah, I guess having just more of a board is just more worth it versus Cyber. I do think letting Cyber have Performer because Performer is just a 3/3, which can just like profitably block a creature of JN's, and makes this clock like because JN currently has a 2-turn clock. If Cyber drops Performer right here, then that clock is no longer guaranteed because Cyber can block 1 creature next turn, and then block another 2-power creature the next. Oh, actually no. Actually never mind. Double Young Necro means that JN creates 2 1/1 skeleton tokens if one of them dies. Never mind. So Performer. So actually, never mind. I completely I didn't like play that through correctly in my head. So assuming Cyber doesn't have anything else to back up this Performer, okay. So on JN's draw steps, gonna seal the tomb, on Autumnal Watch. Okay. And this is good because this means that next turn, Cyber could reasonably empty his hand and then flip Performer. Yeah, that's a problem. Devouring Flame gives so I guess the Seal of Tomb was an attempt to grab Autumnal Watch so that just in case JN because JN's out can definitely like just drop a sack outlet and then Blood Artist drain for drain for a lot. But yeah, so game one goes to JN. Let's look at sideboards here. So I think the Seal of Tomb is definitely coming in. This is Seal of Tomb. This is the matchup that Cyber was expecting, and why Cyber had 3 of them main. So the 4th one is definitely coming in. Duress, I don't know about. Maybe to grab Egg. How many copies of Egg is JN running? Probably the full playset. Yeah. Not worth it to hit it, like, because JN's Egg is multi-creature, so I don't think Duress would be coming in. Salva? I think this is a matchup where Salva is too slow, but Salva can just exile all copies of Adiran if it does come down. Unassuming Swineherd is also good versus JN because you can play it mid combo to exile JN's creatures. Also, the token is actually, does that replace dice triggers? Because if so, that could be super relevant versus JN. Reign of Ruin is also really good. Because if you just don't do the Winnow cost, it's just a 2-mana Wrath for everything in JN's deck. So yeah, I think maybe JN might bring out some like the more like win-conny cards. Like I think Unmasker on turn 1 is okay because it kind of acts as interaction, but Warden and Performer are a little bit like too grindy for this matchup, and they just bring in like Reign of Ruin, Seal the Tomb, maybe Salvatore, maybe Unassuming Swineherd. I'm sorry, definitely Unassuming Swineherd, maybe Salvatore. Meanwhile, on JN's side, counter Seal the Tomb? It's not unheard of. I don't know. Duress for sure. I don't think, like, is Villainy enough of a problem for this deck to bring in Ozen for? I don't know. Stolen Seeker's probably coming in. Yeah, all I can think about is like hand attack and like stuff like Zetla. I think Zetla and hand attack for JN, if anything. But JN's main board is pretty solid. And the Ozen might come in depending on how scared JN is of Villainy, but I don't think JN should be scared of Villainy at all. Okay. Okay, so we're starting game 2. Both players are drawing their initial hands. And hopefully this time Cyber doesn't have to mull down to 5 for their sake. JN is keeping it 7. Cyber's still thinking about it, which isn't a good sign. Oh, Cyber saying, I did not intend to keep that card in there. Whoops. And so mulling to 6 and keeping at 6. Oh, and Cyber just playing Shardstone Rift tapped and passing. I kind of know what you want to see. Like, Cyber wants to be, I think, opening up with hand attack to some extent. Or just, like, I guess, keeping mana up for Exeunt. JN does have a turn 1 play, judging by, ooh, okay, and getting white. That is, getting Arctic Mine is a very interesting decision there. Okay, playing the turn 1 Duress. So JN did board in Duress. Interesting, yeah. Just as expected. Oh my god. And Cyber's hand is just 2 Reign of Ruins and 3 lands. Okay. Yeah, I see you, Cyber. I see you. So yeah, in the fair matchup, Reign of Ruin is just insane. And Cyber just draws, goes to end. Assuming that they just drew another land. that makes sense. Could also have like strike from the shadows and is trying to like not telegraph it by not cracking their fetch land yet. Though actually, I do wonder why they didn't crack the shock fetch on their upkeep, because they had a handful of like a bunch of lands and no gas. I would have expected Cyber to crack the shock fetch. Do they not realize it's a shock fetch? Like, do they forget that? Also, viewers might be wondering about the high number of like off-color shock fetches that JN is playing. An important thing to remember is that Adiran survivors, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you can pay 1 life to return from the graveyard to the battlefield. So it's not just creatures; it triggers also on stuff like shock fetch lands, which makes it very strong. And generally, Jane's deck is the one pressuring the life total, not the other way around. So tapping out turn 2 for a Young Necro. Again, like cards like Young Necro make the fair matchup like so much better. Because sure, like Cyber has a wipe here, but then Jane's just like, cool, I'll convert my entire board into slightly smaller creatures. Thank you very much. Oh, and Cyber brought in Soul Leak. Interesting. And Cyber's going to Soul Leak on end, Soul Leak the Young Necromancer. Jane is still going to get a skeleton, but that's half the clock. And it does, and killing it before Jane can drop other stuff, which Cyber would then have to respond with the wipe. It's just, yeah, it's just better to do that. The top deck Soul Leak, so it was pretty good. But yeah, it looks like Cyber's deck has completely swapped plans to like a more like, because even main board is kind of controlling, but it still has like a lot of like mid-rangey cards in terms of like Warden. But it looks like game 2 completely switching to the control plan, which makes sense. Jayan thinking here, tapping 2 for another Young Necro, that would be a heartbreaker. Nope. Oh my god, Egg of Avarice. And yeah, convenient skeleton. Gonna sack it for an Adiran Survivor probably, just because Adiran Survivor. Like once you have Egg on, like Egg resolved, yeah. The problem with Cyber's deck is that it has no way to interact with non-creature permanents once they're resolved. So once Egg is resolved, you might as well try to just go Adiran, sack outlet. Because if JN has either Adiran in or a sack outlet in hand, and Cyber doesn't have and Cyber doesn't have a way. Okay, so I guess just gonna Reign of Ruin to try and kill the Adiran to preempt it, because this way, unless JN has a fetch land, JN can't recur the Adiran to then search something with Egg. But this does mean that I think that Cyber shouldn't have done this, even though JustNobody is like on a lower clock now. Like, sorry, not that JustNobody is on a lower life total now. I think keeping 2 mana up to like threaten a Steal the Tomb or something would have been a better play. Does Reign of Ruin require you to have at least one target that has Winnow? Like, how does this work? No, it just deals 2 damage to each creature. So Cyber could have kept up the mana. So yeah, Cyber is tapped out versus JN with 6 cards in hand and a Adiran in grave. This is not the position you want to be in. JN saying, well, here's hoping I've got a land in the top 8 cards. JN doesn't have Optimal Watch mana, so what is this about? So JN has another Adiran Survivor. Okay, so JN is now gonna egg into egg for Optimal Watch, and then try to hit a land in the top 8 cards of his library, because I'm assuming that means that JN already has a Blood Artist in hand and just needs the mana to be able to play it. And so if JN hits a land anywhere in the top 8 cards, JN just wins on the spot here because Cyber's tapped out. Okay, now it's time to spin the wheel. And yeah, that's the first. Okay, JN just hit a land on the first hit, so that's it. It's a shock fetch, which is not as good. But then yeah, this just So now just Jayan plays the shock fetch, pays the 2 to have it come in untapped, search the library for a land, probably a basic here just in case Jayan counts the life totals wrong, and so that Jayan doesn't accidentally kill himself by paying for this Arctic Mine. Yeah. Now taps 2 for Blood Artist or Twilight Prophet. Or Twilight Blade, yeah, Twilight Blade. And now Jayan just infinitely loops Adiran survivors with Optimal Watch. Cyber's all tapped out. And that's it. Jayan wins 2-0 and advances to the grand finals versus CFT Sock. So good games to both players. It's interesting because Cyber was the one to win the last Pro Tour, so it would have been poetic if Cyber had been able to make that comeback and do it. But it's still no hard feelings. Jayan, Cyber, and CFT Sock are all very strong players, so having them as a top 3 is just fine. And we'll see who comes out as the Pro Tour Season 2 champion in the upcoming Grand Finals between JustNobody and CFT Sock. And CFT Sock is on a combo deck of his own, so it'll be interesting to see who can, because then at that point it's basically just a race for who can go off faster. Until that happens, I'm Caillou. This is MSEM Pro Tour Season 2 coverage, and I'm signing off.